Boy, oh boy, do I have a story for you guys. This one took like about the whole week to put together and confirm some stories and stuff, but I did manage to get it put together. And I want to put a disclaimer out there too. Whatever names were mentioned in this article or whatever, please don't go and harass them. It's not right to do. And I understand there are some people that are mad with Bungie. Completely understandable. I'm even mad with P.D. Parsons after reading this article. But please, big disclosure, and let everybody know, and I am going to disown you if you do this. Please do not attack the developers or the CEO. Vent your frustrations out in the comment section, and please trust me, just do that and have yourselves a good day. And let's get right into this article. In September, Bungie made a huge announcement. After the developer spoke publicly about its desire to push back on toxic work culture, CEO P.D. Parsons pulled back the curtain on a number of initiatives in an effort to recognize our shortcomings. Bungie would hire a diversity and inclusion director, updating hiring practices, improve training and tools, allow anonymous HR reporting, and end focused arbitrations. The announcement was lauded across the industry, appearing to be a set of proactive, forward-looking moves in industry amid an industry-wide working condition scandals. If anybody's not familiar with the scandals that have been going on with the video game industry lately, Activision, Ubisoft, and Riot Games have been under a lot of scrutiny lately about how they treat their employees, how they make their games, and all that type of stuff. I can leave a little link or a little card up here that's going to pop up to where I've made videos on Activision, and I think Ubisoft too, I'm not too sure, but I'll leave a link so you guys can catch up to this position in time. The response from within the company was different. Many of its current and former employees felt that their experience at the company, going as far as back as 2011 and recently as this year, dramatically clashed with Bungie's virtuous and self-portrait. While some praised the news, for many others, hiring a D&I director or ending mandatory arbitration in all employee contracts was far too little, far too late. For others still, it was only one step on a long journey to a potentially better future, but with roadblocks remaining along the way. IGN has spoken to 26 current and former employees that have worked at Bungie within the last decade. Their accounts of the studio's work culture encompass a wide range of experiences. They span overt sexism, boys club culture, crunch, and HR protection of abusers, as well as more complex stories of microaggressions, systematic inequalities, and difficulties in being heard. However, interviewees also include a number of more recent employees who, despite their own hurts, truly believe the studio is slowly but steadily improving, are candid about the immense challenges of trying to turn such a massive ship into a better direction, and whose accounts of change line up with statements made to IGN by P.D. Parsons' response to this article. Now, some of you may be asking, Gar, why don't you just keep reading the article instead of stopping in between the videos and talking to it? I'm going to tell you something right now. I do not trust this article. It sounds like literally a fluff piece to get the negative news out there, but kind of make it, patch it together and make it sound really good. Anyway, I'm going to keep reading the article. Every source we interviewed joined Bungie because they wanted to be part of making video games they cared about. But of all of them, they've been forced to grapple personally with a question. How does a massive AAA gaming company of 800 plus employees fully root out a toxic culture and become truly safe, diverse, and healthy workplace to work? There is seemingly no micronisms for Bungie's historic company-wide cultural troubles than its narrative team, which has experienced toxic leadership, issues with crunch, and at times unmanageable separation between its ideas of old Bungie and new Bungie culture, and more with all in the last 5 or 6 years. We spoke with a number of individuals who were close to or part of the narrative, painted a picture of a severely divided group whose problems originated as far as back as Destiny 1. Several sources spoke of a narrative team led from the time who appeared to suffer from massive burnout during the project, creating an increasingly toxic work environment for others on the team, enough so that the team members kept a countdown of days since the last explosion on a whiteboard. Many people I spoke to were familiar with the story of him throwing a chair at a window because he felt others were ruining his creative vision of the game. And yet he stayed at the studio for several years, eventually leaving and then being invited to contract work on Destiny 2. Some sources had encountered with him during this later period said that he would frequently issue narrative directions despite no longer being a senior team member, and would become angry when he felt the Destiny 2 writers were deviating from his original vision of for Destiny 1. One source told a story of him yelling at her over the phone so aggressively that she was brought to tears, and she subsequently refused to be on phone calls with him without a third party present. I'm going to interject into this one, and it's going to be a long video, guys. It's kind of give you a heads up, a bit of a warning to let you know, but that dude right there in the workplace should have been removed and never hired again. Honestly, this is the type of stuff that makes me mad with Bungie, that I seriously do not understand. What is the hiring process? What are you guys doing? Do you even keep, do you even keep records of these people that have these problems and stuff, and possibly never hire them again if they keep doing this type of stuff? You know, kind of a big brain thing to do, Bungie. This lead was not only the narrative team member impacted by burnout on Destiny 1, and much after the team left following its release, Bungie assembled a new team for Destiny 2 that, over time, became staffed by women and people of color at a ratio higher than many other teams at the largely white and male Bungie. However, it was run during this period by a series of white male leaders who, according to many of our sources, made life miserable for their writers for years. Most of these folk were too reluctant to have these people named in an article like this, fearing repercussions either for themselves or for others who had vocally complained about perpetrators in the past. While the majority of our sources also wish to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal or harm to their careers, one ex-Bungie employee was willing to be named, Cookie Hipponia, a woman of color whose stories of the team's turmoil were coordinated by a number of others. Many of our sources saw the plight of the narrative team from the outside, but Hipponia was married directly within it. Hired initially as a contractor in 2016, she first started at Bungie as a copy editor, then later as a full-time employee on the narrative team through 2019. Hipponia recalled that when the first time she stepped in, Bungie hadn't had a lot of editing oversight on the Destiny franchise, and had previously focused very much on its story consistency or the community. That led to a leadership that appeared on operate without normal profession boundaries. As Hipponia puts it, they just had a bunch of people who wrote things and kind of had the run of the place. One leader from earlier in this period was described by one of the anonymous sources as a sexist nightmare who yelled in meetings and who would throw papers across tables. Multiple people told us he would frequently rewrite things at the last minute, often on the way to voice recordings. Writers wouldn't learn about changes to the work until the voice lines had already been recorded. When people objected to his demeanor, he told them that they needed thicker skins and learned how to take criticism. He called one woman on the team unmanageable. Ooh. Another source, he said he was literally the worst person I've ever worked for. He was eventually let go, but was replaced by what our sources say were similarly antagonizing men. One lead frequently made sexist remarks, but also complained about reverse sexism. On at least one occasion, made homophobic remarks to a queer colleague. He would openly mock his team members in idea meetings, then play his mockery off like a joke, and would frequently take credit for work of others had done. Hipponia recalled an occasion when said late attempts to hand off her editing duties to a relatively new employee during a meeting with top Bungie leadership about the need for story community, asking her, "What is it you do anyway?" When Hipponia confronted him about it later and asked why her task was being given away, he told her he was just joking around. A third narrative lead was called a callous, hysterical, authoritarian, and curious and cruel leader by one anonymous source. Hipponia said he would frequently ask her to do secretarial and administrative tasks like taking notes at meetings or looking up information he could have looked up himself. Despite her position as a writer and editor on the team, others recalled that he frequently insulted her who stood up for themselves, including publicly dressing down the narrative after they accommodated a last-minute request, asked that as such a rush not happen again. On another occasion, he separated and cornered an employee who stood up to him to yell at them. Multiple sources say he regularly made racist remarks, including a lunch where one source recalled him making a number of inappropriate quoops about Latin American gangs. Boy, this is really starting to sound like something that came out of the Blizzard section. of a article about them, how the employees were harassing the employees, doing sexual advances, all that type of stuff. But I do have another question for PD, basically. PD Parsons, basically the CEO, from what I'm reading from this article, which was CEO around that time. How could you not notice any of this happen, or any of your employees telling you what's going on? How could you ignore this? That's one of my big questions for you, PD. I really would like an answer for that. The narrative team worked 60 to 70, 80, even 100 hours a week during some expansions, frequently with no breaks in between crunch periods. Even aside from its turbulent senior members, the narrative team was in chaos throughout the development of Destiny 2 and a member of its follow-up expansions, constantly having to ship new content. It saw high turnover and burnt out as a result. Eponia recalled ongoing struggle to get narrative contractors hired full-time to help ease the burden on the team. Even though the department was overwhelmed, it was repeatedly denied requests to bring on new full-time members, and contracts would often not be renewed or extended in time, resulting in months-long periods where the department was left understaffed. Those close to the team described its members working 60, 70, 80, even 100 hours a week during some expansions, frequently with no breaks in between crunch periods. One team member crunched while so sick they were unable to type and had to have someone else type for them while they dictated. Another source said the team have been told not to crunch as part of a growing studio to eliminate the practice. The idea was the studio would simply cut features if crunch was the only way to get them done. However, many of the writers felt that they had been backed into a corner after the painful release of Destiny 2's first expansion, Curse of Osiris. Curse of Osiris' story has been lambasted on Reddit, with a few female narrative team members being singled out by the community for harassment, death threats, and vitriol. Our sources say these women didn't receive support inside the studio or from the community team for what they were going through, and multiple sources were aware of one member of leadership still at the studio who emailed Reddit comments about these women to other company leaders in a seemingly bid to tear down the narrative team because players did not like the story. The same leader is also said to have been dismissive during a meeting about the controversy, explaining that no one should be worried about they were just going to bring back the Destiny 1 writing team to solve everything. In fact, multiple people familiar with the writing team related stories of its members being treated poorly by other departments at the studio, being consistently derided, and when the game was received badly. As a result, the narrative team was afraid of what would happen if it shipped something else that appeared to the community to be incomplete or not up to standard, so they continued to crunch, some of them going so far as to hide the overtime from their leads so they wouldn't enforce the story cuts. Crunch was exacerbated by the constant need for revisions and last-minute changes, often worsened by constant conflicts over who had control of the story. Creative direction overall was fraught due to the pull of different groups and powers at the studio. Some of Bungie's old guard were especially precious about the division of Destiny 1 and reluctant to change anything about the tone, characterizations, or the direction of the story as it moved into Destiny 2 and its subsequent expansions. This was especially, I kind of burped right there, frustrating for the team in cases where that vision had never explicitly defined in the game or elsewhere, but only existed as ideas in the heads of people who no longer worked in narrative. Another issue was the development cinematics were considered a prestige project, largely written separately from the main writing team in a star chamber. The cinematics team frequently tried to operate independently from the narrative team, resulting in disconnects from established lore, planned quest narratives, and major story beats. The cinematic team's decision, Hipponia and others recalled, would override decisions made by the narrative team, forcing last-minute rewrites and more crunch. The clashes of these different interests caused further troubles as underrepresented writers and allies on the team endeavored to make Destiny stories more inclusive and thoughtful in its portrayals. These familiars with the writing team were unaware of numerous scenarios where higher-up male narrative team members wanted to portray women in ways that were degrading, tone-deaf, or casually sexist. The non-lead writers, both women and allies, would push back, fighting to tell the kinds of hopeful and empowering stories with Destiny's women that were so often told throughout its male characters. While they did have a number of successes on this front over the years, it was often extremely challenging and painful for those bringing these issues forward to be heard, sometimes requiring assistance from sympathetic individuals with clout outside the team. A number of sources told stories of male narratives at the studio who pushed forward storylines for characters like Eris Morn, Marisov, Anna Bray, Ikora Ray, Soria Hawthorne, and others that leaned on harmful stereotypes of women and mental health struggles, often despite objections from women's and supportive allies across the studio. I could go on for a long time about all these women, all ways women have been made to stand by as the men on the team have written characters in baffling and unrecognizable ways, said a source familiar with the matter. Another example of a time when the diverse members of the writing team were not listened to is an instance of Devram K, a scout player's been in a European Dead Zone location who provides missions and talks about his love of food and tea. At one point in Destiny's 2 development, a member of the writing team added in a tiny piece of dialogue for Devram referring to his missing partner. It was a single small line, many of others intended to be said by both Devram and many other characters who comment on similar circumstances that about their relationships, thoughts, and feelings. The line passed multiple edits and checks and was put into a build of the game before someone higher up in the studio noticed it, demanded to be taken out, or else they couldn't ship the game in Russia or China because of the mere implication of a gay romance. So this actually explains a lot how Destiny 1 and Destiny's 2 development went. Holy cow, this game was really slaughtered in the narrative direction. No wonder this game came out so dog shit and so unappealing to so many people, because they had the higher ups come over there, screw with everything, and just ship it out in the way it was because, you know, it's last minute, we might as well just get it out. Screw whatever you guys were doing. We're in charge here. Screw you guys. We're shipping it. And that just, it disheartens me to even think of being a Bungie fan, even back then, where I used to love Bungie when they came out with like Marathon, so many other games I can't even remember. But it makes you think that during the whole time while they were working on the development of this game, that they did all this to the developers. And I'm still throwing P.D. Parsons in this because in 2016 he took over, and none of this was addressed until 2019. So for 3 years that he was CEO of the company, all this happened under his jurisdiction. It's absolutely a mess. I'm going to continue with the article. Issue received attention across the studio when it was sent to a QA tester to fix as a bug, causing an internal uproar. Eventually, the line was adjusted to have Devram just talk about someone named Mark, without any reference to who it was. This made it into the final game, and Bungie ended up lauded for it, including a gay character, especially as Devram voice actor confirmed their relationship to media not long after. Unaware of the stir it had caused within the studio, one source recalled being furious. Bungie's writers had to try to gently make the story more inclusive with Destiny's first canon gay relationship. Bungie leadership had tried to stop it, but then got to enjoy positive tension anyway. In all of the situations, the members of the writing team who fought for change would routinely be told they were difficult to work with, not supported enough of their leaders, or were aggressive or abrasive and needed to be better at taking criticism. These criticisms were often used as feedback with the team push for promotions after each new challenging release period, with several being turned down time and again. Antonia specifically was told she could get she couldn't get promoted because she wasn't good enough at the game, despite the fact that her narrative responsibilities were unrelated to gameplay design. But when she asked to be given time at work to play and improve, even offering to tie those hours into a specific work task, her request was denied. She also said that her own stress levels skyrocketed during her time at Bungie, increasing her need for anti-anxiety medication, therapy, and ultimately resulting in stress-related gastronomical issues that require surgery. Hyponia was not alone. Other sources close to the narrative saw their colleagues grow increasingly stressed and broken down as they experienced more health issues as time went on. In 2019, the situation became unattainable, and the entire writing staff tried a last-ditch effort to mitigate their constant conflict with their leads with HR, but were once again told they needed to try harder to work with people who were making their lives miserable daily. Despite the team reiterating that the leads did not appear to be making efforts to build these same bridges on their end, many wrote letters to CEO P.D. Parsons begging for help, and they never heard back. Until it was multiple writers quit or threatened to quit all at once, including every woman on the narrative team, that Bungie finally dismissed the leads responsible for the chaos and began to take the team's concerns more seriously. Those connected to the narrative team today say that things have improved with more funding and employees to share the load, and new leads specifically tasked with helping department recover. But ultimately took a sacrifice of many people's careers and mental emotional well-being to get it there. So after reading all of that, I'm really starting to think the cash shop that they implemented a long ago really does not fund the development team, the ones that actually make the game and give them more money to help expand and make more, we'll get more people in and take the load off of people, because I'm pretty sure it's a lot. But the other thing though I do want to point out in the article, if you guys didn't catch that, it basically says this: despite the team reiterating that the leads did not appear to be making efforts to build the same bridges on their end, many wrote the letters to CEO P.D. Parsons begging for help, and they never heard back. So P.D., so for a solid 3 years, you ignored these people, did not listen to them at all, and they've gotten to the point where they've been broken down and they had to do so many over hours of being abused and everything like that. And you still think you want us to believe you that you're this savior, that you're going to save the company? I'm not buying it. While it may be the best example, Nerd is far from the only department to have suffered this way. In fact, our sources pointed to issues within almost every major team at the company. Some noted that the hypocrisy at work here of Bungie's 7 stated company values. First on the list is teams are stronger than heroes. We hold ourselves and each other's to the highest standard of mutual respect, inclusivity, and support. Reads the company's statement on that idea, knowing that the teams whose members speak their minds and take risks will accomplish what no individual ever could. Our wins are always team wins. According to those who spoke to, this translated to a bit of a shorthand internally named that Bungie doesn't tolerate assholes. Leadership, including Parsons, in his response to this article says Bungie doesn't put up with a kind of rockstar culture that at other companies has led to problematic, popular individuals taking advantage of their position to harm others, be that through harassment, toxicity, or other few forms of abuse. Many of our sources say that this company line has up until very recently simply not been true. Almost everyone we spoke to had stories of at least one, if not multiple individuals with long histories at Bungie that seemed to be able to get away with anything, protected by either those above them in leadership chain or long-serving HR employees. When I read Bungie's response to Activision Blizzard, I laughed, one former employee said. This was not my experience there. They had core values that they don't tolerate assholes, even if they are rock stars, but totally do. All that inspirational, those are the values that they want to get to, but they aren't enforcing them. The stories of Bungie's problematic rock stars go way back to the success of the careers of Halo. Some names only came up once or twice. Others we heard repeatedly across multiple different departments over many years of Bungie's history. One top-level company leader who had been with Bungie since Halo was described as sources as an asshole, who would constantly disparage others, was dismissive of those who brought up the company's toxic culture, didn't even bother to learn anyone's name, and whose inappropriate work wardrobe at one point included a shirt that advertised free lap rides. He would also getting incredibly drunk at company events and would clip his toenails at his desk. Notably, this person rose to the company's topmost levels before quietly let go years after the issues. An ambiguous company led email announcing its departure reference to company's zero tolerance policy for bad actors and offered employees mental health support if needed. A different individual who was mentioned by a number of sources also had been at Bungie since Halo 3, eventually rising to a director level throughout the Destiny's games production. Sources described him as excessively abusive to his team, with someone noting that his team seemed to work more late nights than others. One described him as just torturing his staff, while others described him multiple instances of sexist and racist remarks. Another source close to his team described numerous instances of him imitating employees in one-on-one meetings and viciously berating his team when work didn't meet his standards. Stories shared here are far from only examples. We heard a number of similar tales of behavior from not just Bungie leadership, but other employees across multiple departments who were often enabled by their superiors, who would ignore or dismiss bad behavior or complaints against those they favored. In the majority of these cases, sources felt their stories were too specific to share in this piece without personally identifying themselves and risking either retaliation at work or violating a non-disparagement agreement, which many former employees we spoke to say they felt pressure to sign up departing the company. Their fears may not be unfounded. In almost every story we heard, sources say that numerous reports were made to HR leadership about these individuals, but to no avail. HR seemingly unwillingness to help those who complained about toxic leadership was a recurring theme in our interviews. Some felt their reports were ignored entirely, while others told us they had been brought into meetings to an unexpected finding the person they reported sitting in the room discussed their issues. There was at least one long-standing Bungie employee in HR still with the company who almost all of our resources describe as actively protecting harmful individuals. Multiple people said that their jobs seemed to make it all go away whenever someone had an issue with the company. One person recalled them as incredibly insulting to various employees behind their backs and being catty toward women about how they dressed, including a woman. Wow, that's really messed up, Bungie. Again, really, Bungie, how are we supposed to trust you to treat your employees right when you can't even target the people that are causing the most problems within your company, not allowing the flow of work to go so you can get it out, get this product out to your fans and stuff and let them enjoy it. But no, you are more worried about profit more than keeping your developers happy and keeping your fans happy. That is the biggest problem seen within this article. Like, yikes. The influence of this individual coped with numbers and other negative encounters with other HR representatives over the years resulted in a near universal mistrust of HR from almost everyone we spoke to. Many of them noted that they struggled to trust HR anywhere as a general rule. HR, they pointed out, generally exists to protect the company rather than its employees, but Bungie's HR was for many on a different level. It's a well-known fact. If you talk to HR, you're putting your job on the line, said one person. HR has never been there to protect employees. They've always been there to protect the company. I've watched it happen a few times at Bungie, where someone went to HR and things went completely sideways for them. Aside from the obvious issues inherited to having a number of people in position of power at Bungie who were known as toxic, sexist, or otherwise problematic, their behavior and beliefs over the years permitted the company's culture in other less than immediate obvious ways. For instance, in deciding what kinds of people would over time get to wield power and creative influence at the company alongside them, and what makes kinds of people would not. Women especially have struggled at Bungie over the years. Multiple women I spoke with describe an environment where men cultivated a persuasive atmosphere in which where women were inferior. Multiple sources said women were disproportionately talked over in meetings, had their ability to do their jobs questioned, had their ideas ignored, and then used by men who later took credit for them, or simply had their questions or input dismissed. Issues that also seemed to have impacted people of color at the studio of all genders through women of color were especially impacted. One woman recalled numerous meetings where she would give feedback or ask a question, and it seemed as though no one had even heard her. I was completely invisible. A lot of women were put on what I would like to call unappealing projects that were going to end up having major crunch issues, maybe even potentially quality issues, things that were not even funded very well, said another source, things that were not going to succeed in a way that would allow them to shine in a review period. One woman pointed to these and similar scenarios as clear examples of why Bungie has historically had so few women in leadership. Too often, she said, it boiled down to who the top level men at Bungie were friends with, and then who those people were friends with, and who was in the in group. And because it had been white men from the start, that's how it was and historically tended to stay. Another source recalled upper management at Bungie having code names for the women at the studio they found attractive, which they would openly use at the studio without the women knowing. Some of these names were references to their physical form, hair, or outright derogatory terms. Honestly, I'm not surprised. Usually companies only do these type of things when the type of things I am talking about right now is the LGBTQ pins and stuff, and the monthly things they do that they're supporting these people and blah blah blah. Gee, I wonder why Bungie started doing that. Can anybody really tell me why they started to do that? Pretty sure the answer is in the article. One producer was frequently mentioned by sources of routinely making sexist comments and openly talking about his love life and asking his colleagues to comment on images of women he brought up on Tinder. This producer is said to have skyrocketed through the ranks at Bungie and was very charismatic and well liked by Bungie's old guard. Enough so that any reports that to his managers about his behavior seemed to fall on deaf ears. Though he was eventually fired, one former employee recalls a number of his colleagues discussing his departure shortly after as a good guy who got taken out by political correctness, suggesting the women who reported him just needed to get a sense of humor. Another male employee was observed by a number of sources repeatedly harassing his female direct reports with sexual comments and unwanted hugs, while simultaneously belittling them, shutting them down in meetings. Those women eventually had to post signage at their desks, reminding both him and others to stay out of their personal space. Another source recalled a story of the same manager commenting to his female direct report that the only reason she had her job was because she was a woman. The manager was eventually let go, but it took a number of years of inappropriate behavior for it to happen. Other underrepresented groups had different struggles. Several recounted stories of managers and leads making racist remarks or even using slurs to refer to more diverse Destiny characters, or in at least one instance, an individual at the studio. Several employees also witnessed discrimination against transgender individuals at the studio, including questions about which bathrooms they were using, refusal to use correct pronouns, and other inappropriate questions. 2016 to 2018, Hippononia became part of an internal diversity community that had been formed the year before. The community was an official Bungie group that, because of company restrictions, allotted hours for meetings, and the lack of considered support for this particular group's needs to be successful. Meet only during lunch breaks rather than working hours. About half of the original community was made up of diverse individuals from various departments who were there to push for change, but the other half was made up of company leaders, all white, who Hipponia and other sources say put roadblocks in at every possible turn. Pushes to add a gender-neutral bathroom to the company to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and to complete a survey that would rate Bungie on its LGBTQ equality and inclusion were all stimulated or rejected. Hipponia and other diverse members began to quit the community in 2018. As the community bled members, Bungie eventually decided that it was overall ineffective and just shut it down entirely. We do not want to deny or refute any statements regarding individual experiences at Bungie. However, in respect to the hard-working members of our community, we believe it is important to recognize that the fact that the BDC was never deemed overall ineffective, nor was it ever shut down entirely. Our members, currently 100% composed of individuals underrepresented communities, deserve to be accurately remembered on their unceasing efforts despite the challenging nature of the work they have taken on. Another group that met extraordinary challenges at Bungie were those who dealt with physical or mental health issues. While Bungie's company's health benefits were lauded by many who spoke to, A number of people who also mentioned struggling or knowing people who struggle with physical or mental health problems for which Bungie was not just unaccommodating, but sometimes even hostile. One individual with health issues was forced to self-medicate with leftover medication from a previous surgery because they weren't allowed to take any more time off or to address or alleviate these issues during crunch. One person was dealing with grief over a death in the family said they were penalized in a review period for being abrasive and uncommunicative during the time despite their manager knowing the context. Multiple sources knew of individuals on the autism spectrum who struggled with receiving negative feedback without concentrated direction on how to improve communication. So far what I've read in this article, it just sounds like power trip after power trip, people trying to take control, people trying to change things and everything, and it just comes at the health of these narrative developers and just the developers in general. Bungie did not care. They just wanted to get this product out and try to please the customers, but as fate would have it, it did not happen, and Bungie really screwed the pooch. Let's continue. Still, two other individuals described a situation where they took time off to deal with either personal or familial health issues, only to return and seemingly be penalized by being moved onto a less desirable project. Numerous people we spoke to, all who were no longer with the company, described the high levels of anxiety brought on by their work at Bungie, with some attributing it to crunch which continued to occur despite studio claims to the contrary across departments like QA, localization, audio, narrative, and others referencing a toxic work environment or abusive managers. Many said they became depressed and eventually having to increase existing therapy sessions or start therapy for the first time. Some were prescribed medication and others began drinking more. Several reported being suicidal. Among many of our sources was a Jesus, that's a really dinger word. Cognizance that, in a strange way, Bungie was better than many other studios. Few people were aware of any overt physical harassment or assault, and a few barely encountered any inappropriate behavior at all during the time at the company. But as the women put it, it's not necessarily to have a Cosby Suite level scandal for a company's culture to be problematic. It's very easy to be like, we don't have pictures of naked women postering in the office, therefore we're not sexist, she said. Well, you are, but that's not the subtitle things you haven't picked up on. It's pay discrepancy, it's looking at the data and see how many women leave, how many minorities leave. They discount each individual story saying they weren't happy, they weren't a culture fit. It's hard to see, harder to quantify these things. That's not a silver bullet, that's not a smoking gun, but when you look at it compiled together, white men at the top, promoted, paid well, minorities likely to leave, all these things that are indicators that there is a problem. Not just being content that you've never heard anyone say anything racist. The stories we've shared so far represent some of the worst of Bungie's history. A work culture with deep roots that cannot simply be dug up overnight. But in response to IGN's request for comment, Bungie CEO P.D. Parson, who has been with Bungie for almost 20 years and CEO since 2016, had reiterated that Bungie does want to try. In a lengthy reply, he opened an apology to anyone who ever experienced anything less than a safer, fair, and professional working environment at Bungie. I am not here to refute or to challenge the experiences shared by people who have graced our studio with their time and talent, Pearson says. Our actions, or in some cases and inactions, have caused these people pain. And I apologize personally on behalf of everyone at Bungie, who I know feel a deep sense of empathy and sadness reading through these accounts. He went on a detailed number of actions the company has taken in recent years to change its culture, many of which were also mentioned to us by current and recent of the employees of the studio. A number of these employees told us that they believe slow though it may be, Bungie is trying to move in the right direction, largely thanks to a growing number of diverse individuals and their allies within the studio who have tirelessly working over the years to change its course through individual actions, company groups, and growing employees, pressure for a more diverse, healthy, and inclusive workplace. Sources tell us of a quiet but deeply significant change that began taking place in the last few years. They began to notice a number of more powerful, problematic individuals leaving the company one by one. Many left quietly and professionally, giving the appearance of a voluntary departure, and even left a few on public positive terms, celebrating with fond farewell letters to the entire staff or Bungie's community. Most of them still have high-ranking positions elsewhere in the game industry, while some sources claim that certain individuals among them were quietly asked to leave. The exact circumstances around this seeming house cleaning are unclear. Parsons has confirmed to IGN the departures had happened, admitting the company had not been transparent or swift as it could have been in removing individuals, and adding the Bungie was only able to do this when brave people came forward or when bad behavior is conducted in the open. We believe the people whose behavior warranted removal from our company have been terminated or are no longer working for Bungie. But if new information comes to light, whether those through this story or by named or anonymous people coming forward, we will act on that information and investigate with integrity, Pearson says. While this may be good news for the future of Bungie, their former victims who are aware of the exodus told us they felt betrayed and left behind. Their careers, mental health, and emotional well-being were repeatedly damaged for years, they said. Meanwhile, the people who harmed them have moved to other companies and will continue to largely be celebrated by their colleagues in the gaming public. Sorry about that. And because of their non-disparagement agreements, there's no way to safely call them out, even in an article like this. You do need some kind of justice, said one person. That's what's absent. There's no catharsis when bad actors are thrown out. There's no awareness of who's a bad actor to avoid. Without that, I don't think it's possible to build trust at a wide scale. Broadly, company culture is always a work in progress, but Bungie has taken some specific actions the last few years in the right direction. Several sources note that in 2018, when Bungie brought on a diversity and inclusion lead, there appeared to be a significant push by the studio to start having measurable goals for the amount of diverse individuals in leadership positions. Though some people within the studio pushed back, these goals were put in place. While there is still work to do, Bungie's previous blog post maintains that there's been progress at the topmost levels of the company. According to Parsons, women or people from underrepresented communities comprise of half of Bungie's board of directors, and 40% of Bungie's executive teams are women or people from underrepresented communities. Most recent employees we spoke to have indicated that this is the most diverse shift has been apparent, not just as the company's leadership levels, but throughout the most departments as well. While Bungie did not share older statistics for comparison, it did prove some recent numbers. 20.5% of Bungie's employees are women. Women made up 31% of Bungie's new hires in 2021, as well as 22.5% of people at leadership level. People who are identified as members of unrepresented groups make up 18.6% of the company, 23% of new hires in 2021, and 20% of company leaders. Though its first DI-led departed of the end of 2020, Bungie replaced her just recently with a brand new D&I director to continue to spearhead these efforts, including ongoing work with ERGs such as Black at Bungie, Women at Bungie, Trans at Bungie, and the newly formed Accessibility at Bungie, as well as improvements to company benefits, including bringing diverse speakers and taking on new charitable initiatives. Bungie has also reformed the diversity community. Haponia and many others quit several years ago, which has been working in tandem with ERGs to make small but meaningful adjustments to company culture. And just this year, Parsons told us it's begun conducting reviews of its hiring, compensation, and promotion activities, including hiring a third party to audit its compensation practices. Many of our sources as well as Parsons also confirmed that Bungie crunch issues had actively improved over the last several years. Those sources said some teams still struggled here and there. Team collaboration has cited as another active department. A few years ago, there was a push studio-wide to move to Agile development, effectively a methodology where teams come to development solutions through collaboration and teamwork. Opinions on the initial move to the technique were mixed, but current employees we spoke to felt it had ultimately made a difference. When you combine Bungie's irreverent past with a culture that's about being the best or building aspiration moonshots, I think there's a tolerance for people being mean to each other. One person said. It was like stories sharpening stones by throwing them at each other. In terms of work culture, there's been a shift to nuisance and empathetic about people's personal growth. While there are people trying, they see the need for many perspectives, and they don't always know how to do it. Sometimes they get in their own way. It's getting better, and our responsibility is to make things better for the future. One internal vehicle for this has been the company's town hall meetings, where individuals can ask questions of leadership and then effectively vote on questions others pose with the most popular questions. In theory, getting answers, the system has been a useful venue for many to voice frustrations through mixed success over the years. In an earlier incarceration, this system didn't provide any immunity, and several sources felt that they couldn't candid or recall being dogpiled by their peers to, or even leadership if they asked the questions others disliked. With the addition of anonymity, sources said more people felt comfortable asking questions about issues of diversity, burnout, and toxic studio behavior, and while some felt it had been very helpful in voicing concerns to management, others noted that leadership often gave very lukewarm responses to serious issues. Several people recalled a senior member of the company responding to a question about a toxic work environment by saying no one had ever come to him about toxicity and that the issue wasn't a serious one. Others remembered questions about that appeared to be dismissive or derogatory toward Black Lives Matter and the Employee Resource Group at Bungie, with one resource feeling that management didn't shut these remarks down effectively. There is a sense among our sources that Bungie is on their way towards a truly safe, inclusive workplace, that it still has a long road ahead to get there. Many employees were asked about the overall work culture problem that believed company leaders like Parsons wanted to try and make things better, but just generally didn't know how. One current Bungie employee said that the studio is full of well-meaning people, even at a leadership level. They do care about social causes. The criticisms we have at a studio level is that they don't know how to push these causes forward. They aren't sticking their feet in the ground and saying, no, we'll never try anything. It's kind of this well-meant confusion of, how do we do this? A former employee remarked that it was all well too often the job that the minorities at the studio were to educate everyone else. A job that inevitably meant doing extra unpaid labor at best, in which sources who did that work say was often dismissed or ignored. Another source put it consistently. People are willing to learn, but wouldn't it be nice to be somewhere where everyone already knows? A few people I spoke to expressed worry that this article would scare away more diverse individuals who wanted to play to Bungie, further exacerbating the studio's problems. Though some of these expressed this fear were the victims of incidents like this one described above, they had a firm belief in the studio's consistent movement in the right direction. Even though it shouldn't be on their shoulders, the truth is that the closer we can be to an accurate reflection of our community, the better we'll be as a company, one said. Our workplace has always been better. Be better. I'm glad that as a company we recognize that we're addressing it. One specific area in which many current recent employees expressed optimism for the future was with Bungie's current incubation projects, and one in particular. Bungie has kept it a secret that multiple non-Destiny games are in development, though the ones our sources were aware of have gone through some shifts and cancellations over the years. One of the projects currently greenlit and the one closest to release was frustrating to some of our sources, who felt it was largely staffed through nepotistic practices of only hiring veterans and good friends, reinforcing a culture that had already been proved harmful on Destiny. But another project not yet greenlit was spoken about growingly by these in the know. One described it as a huge divergence from what Bungie has done before. Others told me about its incredibly diverse team of developers, with a significant number of leadership roles held by underpaid, unrepresented minorities. One person said it was the kind of team I want Bungie to have everywhere. Someone close to the project described the group as having a positive, supportive culture in which everyone has proactive about being sensitive and thoughtful about the content they made. They described it as a new culture when Bungie created internationally as a model for what the studio has to be. Another explicitly connected the values of the team working on it to Bungie's company values, saying while people will likely be surprised when they see the project, they will eventually understand how it upholds the values of the company has been trying to stand since they introduced in 2014. If there was to be a change, it would have to be the incubation project showing that things can be built differently, one source said. Sources told us that there were a number of other small teams within Bungie, both within incubation and outside of it, that showed similar promise with diverse membership and multiple women in leadership roles. These teams, while smaller, were microcosms of the kind of culture they believed that would allow Bungie to thrive both internally and publicly as teams of comfortable, safe, respected individuals work together on board new ideas. These, combined with more public and widespread company-wide shifts, gave many of our sources tentative hope for change, even as they emphasized their job was far from finished. Parsons, in the conclusion of his statement to IGN, seemed to agree. At core, I believe we are made of good people who are here to drive good change in the world, he said. I'm proud of the progress we have made, but it's not enough, and it has taken too long. It also has not swept away the bad experiences people had at our studio. As CEO, it is my job to factor both the past and the future and be accountable for all of it. Here and now, speaking with the team at Bungie, reading the stories, and seeing both known and newly surfaced accounts, it is clear we still have work ahead of us. I am committed to it. We are not yet the studio we have potential to become, but we are on our way, and we will not rest or slow these efforts because we recognize that the journey of inclusivity, diversity, and equality is in itself the destination we all strive towards. This is the cradle to achieving our vision, fulfilling the potential of welcoming, equitable home of creative and technical excellences Bungie should be. Our motto, boldly to the stars, have been creative engine since the beginning. We take the same spirit of hope and improvement to the crucial human work in front of us. Our current future actions around the care of people will define Bungie's future, and is most important in that purpose. We are grateful and humbled to continue this work and are energized by the journey ahead. Ultimately, every single person we spoke to had at least at one point loved Bungie. Most thought its pay and benefits were good. They loved their teams and colleagues, and they loved Destiny and the other projects the studio was working on. Many still do. While a number of these who were deeply hurt by the studio in the past expressed cynicism in response to its recent tweet and blog post about becoming better, others issued a challenge to Bungie. Don't just talk, make statements about these issues. Listen to your employees that have been giving this feedback instead of just saying, please give us feedback, summarized one more employee who joined the company more recently. Listen and act on it and tell us what actions you took. It seems like we're talking to the void, and especially listen to the people of color and women. That challenge, one pointed out, isn't just leveled at company level leadership. It's directed at the entire company, top to bottom. That's the problem Bungie needs to solve. Admit their failures here, and show us the roadmap for creating a work environment safe for marginalized genders. These slow rollout, reactionary changes maintain stability of a system that keeps bullies and abusers comfortable at the expense of their victims. 2 days after the public beginning of the Activision scandal, Bungie posted a series of tweets decrypting the behavior described, but distancing themselves from these same behaviors. While the internal response has been mixed, Bungie, that culture, has echoed similar themes. There was simultaneously a recognition that it also some of the way towards improvement. Still, for those who have worked at Bungie, there is a very clear line between saying and doing, and they want to make sure that the studio does that latter. Tweet was so frustrating, said one source, because you're positioning yourself as we're not the problem in response to systematic industry-wide misogyny perpetrates the problem, and the passive mention of wrongdoing is disingenuous to the victims who were harmed on their watch. Stop demanding the harm done to your current and ex-employees on your failures. Stop hiding them. We know, it is known. Show us industry-wide defining progress in the treatment of marginalized employees that can't possibly be mistaken for virtual signaling. Sorry about that, guys. I want Bungie to be what it is repeatedly required me to be. I want Bungie to be brave. You know, like I said at the beginning of the video, this seems like a fluff piece, and the timing of this is just so odd, and just seems like they're trying to cover up with their 30th anniversary that's going on right now, and things just don't make sense, especially with PD Parsons, where he's saying, well, we're doing really good and stuff, but there's still reports coming out where you're ignoring the writing team and many other teams. It only seems when you start to take care of those problems, when the iron starts to get really hot and the pressure starts to come in, and then you're like flipping all around, just starting to, oh, wait a minute, I'll go ahead and do it. And also that too, for the 3 years that you were working, well, since 2016, been multiple people telling you that the harassment to employees are just going horrendously insane. Probably still unpaid hours there too, because the employees are hiding it and they don't want to get fired. Especially with some of the working employees too, if I remember on top of my head. Some of them almost extinguishing their light, if you get what I'm saying with that little saying right there, because usually you can't say this type of stuff on YouTube, and I have to be a little creative to say what I need to say. At one point in the article too, if I'm remembering correctly too, I do agree with this person that says basically do something. Don't say you're just going to do it, Bungie, because you are so infamous about saying that, oh, we're doing something about it, but you eventually never do anything about it. Remember that old saying? Because a lot of the Destiny community remembers this saying, we're listening to your feedback, we're listening to your feedback, we're listening to your feedback, we're listening to the feedback. You guys with this stuff are so tone deaf that it's like talking to a wall that we hear nothing. And I'm glad these developers, and we're finally getting some justice for these developers and stuff, and the people are being weeded out, the bad people. I understand. I hate cancel culture, but when this type of stuff happens to people, like actual people, the people that actually cause the physical harm to the, or physical, mentally, messing with them mentally and stuff, like that, the messed up stuff that was in the article, need to be called out. They need to be not witch hunted, but publicly shamed for what they did to these people, and they need to be taught a lesson. Like honestly, from what I've heard from all of these testimonies and all of that, whoever these people that were in charge or causing some major trouble within the development of Destiny and Destiny 2 need to be removed from the gaming community and the gaming industry as total, because they can't handle themselves correctly to do a correct job or do the job that they were given. Other than that, guys, thank you for listening to me read the article and rant a bit. I really do appreciate it. And if you stick this long, to be honestly, to listen to me talk, please leave me a like and comment. And you know what? Subscribe, please. It helps me. It helps me grow in this community. And, well, hopefully one day I can, become a YouTuber. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. And hey, please be safe out there, guys. Later.